Hi parents, this is Erica Whitfield here, and if you are watching this webinar, you probably have a gifted child. And if you are watching this webinar, you are probably interested in learning how you can help your gifted child handle stress better. I know this is a really big cause for me because I see gifted kids come into my office all the time. They tell me about everything that's on their plate, and it is a lot to manage as a kid. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for caring enough about your kids to want to learn how you can support them better. So let's get right into it. All right, so first, let's just talk about what a gifted kid is. You know, sometimes we have schools that measure this by IQ. Sometimes we have a child who's just exceptional in a certain area, like in the arts or in music. The way we here at Positive Development define gifted kids are any kid who enjoys expressing themselves through the arts, academics, or in other ways. So we think all kids are gifted because they all have special characteristics that they may choose to share with the world. Again, a little bit about me before we keep going. I am a licensed mental health counselor with over 11 years working exclusively with children and adolescents. I'm board certified in telemental health, and I'm also a certified therapeutic art life coach. So you've got a wealth of experience right here in front of you. I love counseling kids. I love how ambitious they are, how heartfelt they are, and how genuine they are, and how they really just want to be their best, even though sometimes they can be misunderstood. And I think with our gifted kids, there's a lot of pressure that they feel from external sources like teachers and parents, even their friends. But most importantly, for gifted kids, there's a ton of stress that they place on themselves. So I just really enjoy working with this population and helping them sort through their ideas. Usually they already have the answers to their problems. They just need a little validation to let them know they're on track. Okay, so gifted kids. Let's look at some of the characteristics that further describe this population. If your child is enrolled in several advanced placement classes, or they've taken they've had a psychoeducational evaluation, they've been evaluated for their IQ and they scored really high on that evaluation, then you may have a gifted child. It strives for perfection. Okay, so if you have that kid who erases constantly on the paper because they want to make sure that their handwriting is just right, or if you have a child who will crumble up their work, over and over again, they've just got to make sure that what they have on that assignment, on that homework assignment, is just absolutely perfect before they turn it in. It's a sign of a gifted kid. These kids also usually show a higher level of emotional intelligence. So this kid may be 11, but may have the maturity of a 13-year-old. So our gifted kids usually are more mature. I almost like to think maybe their frontal lobe is a bit more developed because you'll see better decision making and things like that in some cases. They may get overwhelmed due to high levels of stress. And why? Because they're taking on a lot of stress. These kids may be in several advanced classes, and with that comes a ton of schoolwork and expectations from teachers. This idea that they have to compete with other kids in the classroom, goodness forbid if they get a 92, but the average score in the class with the other gifted kids was a 98, the world comes crumbling down. So they have super high expectations, which come with a lot of stress. You may also see gifted kids too do things like quit easily or avoid challenges. And the reason for this is that, these kids kind of like have innately been able to understand things and comprehend things easily. And so when they are faced with something that they don't get easily, that can be very alarming to them. And they don't realize that all they have to do is maybe study for once. They've never had to study before. Or maybe they need to ask a question. Oh my goodness forbid they have to raise their hand and actually admit that there is something they don't know. That's a big no-no sometimes when you're gifted. So it's difficult for them to admit vulnerability, and it's difficult for them to admit weakness because they think that, I either have it or I don't. I'm either born this brilliant person, so if I don't know this thing, I either need to give up so nobody finds out, or I just don't need to try because it shakes the core of my identity. And then also they may equate things like good grades and achieving goals with their self-worth. I think we all do that even as adults. So we feel like we have to achieve in order to be seen as valuable. And while being ambitious like this can have so many great positives, you can see that it can come with some serious cons too. All right, so things that you may hear a gifted child say are things like, I can't do that because I have too much homework. You know, I can't watch that movie. I've got a 3 tests next week. You may hear them say things like, this has to be perfect. No, I can't settle for mediocrity. No, I can't get an 89. I've got to get a 95. That's my standard. I don't have time to do anything fun. You know, I've got to study. I've got this test coming up. I've got to email the teachers about why they haven't inputted in these grades yet. I don't have time to do anything else. On top of that, I've got chores to do at home. I may have some extracurricular activities on my schedule. There's just no time. Or I barely get any sleep. So you can imagine if you're taking all those advanced courses, and you're staying up late to just get the work done and study, that can really interfere with your ability to sleep. You may also hear gifted kids say things like, I don't want to do this anymore, I quit. And you know, that goes back to Carol Dweck. She wrote a great book. Her name's Carol Dweck, and she wrote she wrote about the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. So the fixed mindset is, if it doesn't come easily, I'm just giving up because I'm not used to things not coming easily. You may hear your gifted child say, can I stay home from school for a month? Because they've given up. Okay, maybe things in the classroom got really difficult. Again, they don't know what to do. They don't know that they should study. They don't know that they should try harder because they've never had to do it before. So they will literally just give up, want to put their heads under the covers and never go back to school again because they feel like they're a failure and there's nothing that they can do about it. They can become hopeless really quickly. You may hear them say things like, I don't have any friends. And that may be because their noses are in books, they're studying, they're not making the time to socialize. Socialization isn't their priority. Or you may even hear things like, I don't want to ask questions because I'll look dumb. And what really irks me is that you even have some, not all, but there's a handful of teachers out there that will even say things to the gifted kids like, you guys should already know this. I shouldn't have to repeat myself. You guys are advanced students. This should be something that comes easy to you. Oh my gosh. And doesn't that just continue to reinforce these negative messages that our gifted kids are already internalizing? And that is not to be dismissive of teachers. Teachers are wonderful, and there are so many more gifted teachers out there that do encourage questions and that do repeat themselves and that do support their kids. But there's a handful that don't, and that can really cause stress for the gifted kid because it's almost like they're getting negative reinforcement for reaching out to try to meet their needs. Okay, and up here, I'm going to scroll up a little bit so you can see my title. So these are the 4 main stressors of gifted kids. So as you can see here, we have perfectionism, this idea that it's all or nothing. It has to be perfect or I'm not going to do it at all. If I don't win, then I just quit forever. Their sensitivity. So gifted kids can be very sensitive about the idea that they made a mistake, almost to the point where sometimes they'll even try to hide their mistakes or just be in denial and act like they don't even exist. And you better not even attempt to try to insinuate that they're having trouble with something, because they will defend themselves to the core that they have no problem, they're totally fine, and you need to back off because they are perfect. Okay. There's external pressure. We already talked about pressure from teachers. They, you guys should know this work. We've got so much to do. We have so much to cover. Come on, move faster. There's pressure from parents. Okay, but parents, you know that your gifted kids probably usually makes all A's, or definitely all A's and B's. And so if you see your all A student come home with a B, what do? Oh my gosh, the world is falling down. My perfect child has now made a B and is no longer perfect. So now we need to panic. We need tutoring. We need punishments. We need to let them know that this isn't okay and they're not performing where they should be performing. We panic. And when we panic, they panic, and that causes stress. Okay, there's social problems. So again, if I'm so busy as a gifted child, focusing on my schoolwork, I may not have time for friends, or I might even be a little awkward and just don't know how to start those relationships, even if I want to make friends. And then let's talk about how all of this contributes to your gifted kids' mental health. So it is not uncommon whatsoever for a gifted child to come into my office and they may be experiencing high levels of anxiety. I've had some kids who just straight refused to go to school because they were just overwhelmed. And you can imagine that if there's so much work that happens in one day, what happens if they miss 2 days? If now it's a week, if now it's 2 weeks, they literally become hopeless and feel like there's no way they can make up all that work. And so they just want to give up. They can have somatic symptoms, stomach aches, headaches, different aches and pains, and it's all just a manifestation of their anxiety. We can have depression. So with those feelings of hopelessness comes this idea of, I just want to run and hide. I want to withdraw from others. I don't want to ask for help because that's just not what I do. I'll look weak if I ask for help. Gifted kids hate looking weak. They have this image that they're at the top of the top. They're strong, they're powerful, they're smart. And so it shakes them to their core to be seen outside of that light. And then we can have mood swings. Again, that just comes from stress, having a lot to do. Think about us as adults. If we have a lot going on, we get snappy. And the same thing happens with our kids. If you had 5 exams that you had to take next week, I bet you wouldn't be bopping around all happy and positive. You'd be stressed. And then things can get really severe when we start looking at things like self-harm. So I've even had some kids that have started cutting because the stress was just too much and that was their way of dealing with it. So all of these stressors of our gifted kids can lead to some pretty serious issues with mental health if these stressors are not addressed. Okay, now the reason why you're here, how can we as parents help our gifted kids? Okay, parents, the first thing I want you to do is to ask your child about his or her goals. So how many times do we as parents kind of place goals onto our children? You know, I expect you to make all A's and B's, or I expect you to try your best in this extracurricular activity. I expect you to do your homework by a certain time. But do we ever check in with our kids and ask them what's acceptable to them? Are our kids really going after their own goals, or are they going after our goals? And the reason I ask that question is because if they're going after our goals, then there's a certain wall that they're always going to hit because these goals aren't their own. We are always motivated to go further and harder for our own goals than somebody else's goals. So check in and ask your kids like, hey, I know in the past I said, I love it if you make all A's and B's, but what do you think is acceptable? And your child may come back and say, well, really, I just want to pass. We don't want to hear that though. Or your child may come back and say, no, all A's is really important to me and that's what I'm striving to get. So check in with your kids instead of assuming or putting predetermined goals onto them. Ask them what their goals are. And if you don't like the response you get back, negotiate. So you can say, okay, look, well, just passing isn't enough for me. I mean, can you at least just do like some A's and some B's? Can we do that? And then, go back and forth and see if you can come to a healthy meeting ground. The second thing I want you to do is to ask your child to evaluate his or her own outcomes. So what do we usually do when a report card comes home? We look at it and we either say, oh, this is amazing, great work. Or we may look at it and we may say, this has a C on it, unacceptable. You need to pull that up to at least a B. But how often do we ask our child, all right, so you got your report card home. Can you tell me what you think? What do you think of what you did? Ask your kid, have them evaluate their own outcomes because you may even be shocked. You may look at this A and B report card and go, good job, fabulous work. But your child may look at you and go, no, this is horrible. I wanted all A's. Okay. Or vice versa. You may look at the report card and you say, you know what, you're capable of all A's, but this kid knows what happened in that class and how difficult that work was and how hard they tried. And the fact that they got a B is incredible to them. So really ask them what they feel, and again, negotiate. Okay, I know you feel this way, I feel this way. What's a healthy negotiation we can put into place here so that we're both happy with the outcomes that are happening? And just remember, parents, in the long run, it's not going to be most important about your judgment of their outcomes. It's going to be most important about their judgment. You don't want your kids growing up in their entire life, they're constantly evaluating themselves based on what they think you would think. They need to start learning how to evaluate themselves based on what they think and desire. That's how you raise independent, young, healthy individuals. I'm not doing my goals for somebody else, I'm doing them for me. Okay, next is ask your child how they would like to be supported. So again, I keep using grades as an example, but what happens if our gifted kid is underperforming, or they're just kind of moody, or they just seem in a funk, they're having trouble doing something? What do? We usually jump in and say, okay, you need tutoring. Okay, you need to take a break. Okay, or you need to. But how often do we say, okay, I see this thing happening. Do you have any ideas of what would be helpful for you? Do you have any ideas of anything I can do to help me help you? And the thing is you might be saying, oh, they're kids, they don't know. But remember, you have a gifted kid. Your kid most likely is very articulate and has well thought out ideas. So I'm pretty sure that they can come back and give you at least a little something that you can build on. So the idea here again is not to place supports onto them, but just ask them how they feel they could best be supported. Okay, and finally, we have provide validation. Now, we're really going to get into this one, because usually when I say provide validation, which is basically let your kids know that you heard them, and you understand them. I have parents say, oh, I do that all the time. I talk to my kids all the time. I tell them that they're listening. I ask them about how their day was. There are different ways to validate. So make sure you're doing it in the way that your child needs. So for example, there's something called problem-solving validation. So your kid may come home and say, this math class is really hard. I just feel like giving up. Okay, so problem-solving validation is when we as parents go, oh, well, I can help you, or you need to study harder, or we'll go to sleep earlier and then you'll have more energy in class and you can pay attention. No, that may not have been the message that your kid was trying to get across to you. You're problem-solving, but maybe they needed another need met. There's also something called dismissive validation. Dismissive validation is when you basically listen to someone, but your response kind of contradicts how the person feels. So if your child says, oh, this math course is so hard, I feel like giving up. An example of dismissive validation would be like, oh no, don't give up. You're so smart. You can do this. Just study harder. And kids hate that, because that's not the message that they're trying to get across to you. They don't want a pep talk in that moment. They just want you to understand, this is something that's really difficult for them. Just hear me in that. And then there is another form of validation, which is my favorite. It's called authentic validation. And this is when you really try to get your kid to understand that you are trying to understand their experience the way they're experiencing it. So if your kid says, man, this math class is so hard, I feel like giving up. Authentic validation would be, wow, this math class is really challenging you. I mean, it is so hard, you don't even want to do this anymore. Tell me more. That's authentic validation. And then the kids are like, oh yeah, you get me. Yeah, you understand. This is really hard for me. And the cool thing about authentic validation is that if you keep going with it, eventually the kids will find a little glimmer of hope. And when they find that glimmer of hope, validate the glimmer of hope. And before you know it, they're problem solving about how they're going to get through this math class, and they're coming up with their own solutions. So an example would be like, yeah, it took me like an hour to do my math homework last night, but today it only took 40 minutes, but that was still really long. Oh, wow. Okay. So you were able to finish your assignment 15 minutes earlier. So you actually got faster at doing the work, and you keep going. And before you know it, you're having a positive, healthy conversation about a problem. Okay, so those are the 4 main ways that I suggest that you help your gifted kid. I'm going to go back and recap them just super fast. Ask your child about their goals. Ask your child to evaluate their own outcomes. Ask your child how they would like to be supported, and provide validation.